Live on the Rasball YouTube channel, it's NFL draft season, and that means it's NFL mock draft season. It's time to get excited. I'm Ben Wasley. I'm bringing you my latest NFL mock draft. We're going to go through all the picks. We're going to talk about the fantasy implications, and we're going to talk about the other possibilities that might happen. The NFL draft is only 3 weeks away, so there's a lot to talk about. Let's get right into it. So with the first pick, this one's really easy. It's going to be Caleb Williams. We know he's going to the Bears. They've made it very clear. They've met with him several times. They're going quarterback. Justin Fields is out of town. We saw that coming a mile away. Caleb Williams is the clear number one pick. Now, whether you like Caleb Williams or not is another question. I personally think he's going to be very good, but his personality is a real question mark. We do know that there's issues about him choosing not to do certain things at the draft. There's a lot of people that think he's going to bust badly. I personally think he's going to be very good because the Bears have put a lot of things in place to make him succeed. He's going to be the first quarterback off the board in the NFL draft, and he's probably going to be the first quarterback off the board in your draft for fantasy as well. Now, with the second pick, that's where things get a little bit more interesting. I've gone back and forth here a couple of times. We know the Commanders are probably going to take a quarterback, but they've got a couple of options. For me, there's 3 top guys in this draft. There's Caleb Williams, there's Drake May, and there's Jaden Daniels. Now, the Commanders have talked a lot about Drake May. There's been a lot of talk within the Commanders brass that potentially Drake May is the guy they're going for, but we do know that Adam Peters kind of likes Jaden Daniels as well. So it's one of those things where they probably haven't picked exactly who they want just yet. I'm going to go with Jake May for now. I personally think Jaden Daniels is actually a better player, and he's probably a better player for fantasy as well. But May's the kind of guy that I think the Commanders will like, and that's why the Commanders are typically kind of average, because they tend to go for the safer options. I think Daniels has more upside, but May's that kind of safe pocket passer, kind of your CJ Stroud style player. He's probably still going to be very good for the NFL, but I think that Daniels is probably the upside pick. Where he goes, we'll have to wait and see. There's also been a lot of people talking about JJ McCarthy potentially going in the top 3. I personally don't see that happening. I think that's a whole lot of smoke. I feel like it's going to be between May and Daniels. Now, with the third pick, that means the Patriots are probably going to sit and select a quarterback. Now, we have heard a lot of talk about people saying, well, the Vikings are going to trade up and they're going to try to get Jaden Daniels or Drake May. I personally think the Patriots would be crazy to do that. Jaden Daniels is a better prospect than we've seen probably since Trevor Lawrence in 2021. I know he's probably the third best or second best on the board this year, but this is a really strong quarterback class. I think you would be crazy to drop out of the top 3 here. I think the Patriots are going to stick and pick. Now, the Patriots do some weird stuff in the draft, but with Bill Belichick gone, I'm hoping that they at least do something sensible here and stay and pick Daniels or Drake May, whichever one's left on the board. Daniels is the guy that you probably want for fantasy. He's got good legs. He makes good decisions, so he doesn't throw a lot of interceptions. He doesn't quite have the accuracy of the guys like a Williams or a May, but he's the kind of guy that's going to organize and manage the game nicely. Plus, he's going to get you a lot of yards with his legs. It wouldn't surprise me at all if out of the quarterbacks in this class, he's the guy that ends up being the number 1 fantasy option long term. I think in your fantasy drafts, regardless of where Daniels goes, he's probably going to be the second quarterback off the board. Excuse me. Now, this is where it gets a little bit. So, the Cardinals have a couple of options here. There's a lot of talk that suggests the Vikings are going to move up in the draft. Now, where they move to, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. I think the Cardinals are one team that they'll be talking to. The Cardinals have said that they're possibly going to talk about trading down, but there's a couple of pretty tuned-in guys that believe the Cardinals have always been going for Marvin Harrison, and they would have drafted Marvin Harrison even if they had the second or third pick. And realistically, they should have had the second or third pick if they hadn't needlessly won some games at the end of the season. Now, Harrison is the best wide receiver prospect we've seen in a long time. He's exactly the guy they need for this organization. They've gotten rid of Marquise Brown, who was pretty average anyway, and they've got essentially nobody. They've got Michael Wilson, but he's not a number 1 option. They need a stud wide receiver, and there's 3 good stud wide receivers in this class. My concern is if they trade back with the Vikings, they've got no chance of getting any of those three, because the reality is that Harrison and also Rome Odunze and Malik Neighbours are all going to be gone by the 11th pick. So unless the Vikings can move up a little bit and then move up a second time to get to the Cardinals, I can't see a situation where the Cardinals are going to want to give this pick away. For that reason, I have them taking Harrison. I think this is probably what happens on the night, but it's not impossible that we see either the Vikings or Denver trade up. They need to give a lot for this pick, but I think it can happen. Regardless, I would expect that Marvin Harrison is the guy that goes first off the board in your fantasy drafts come May, June, July, especially in those rookie drafts. Now, the Chargers are the team that I think probably could move with the Vikings, and I can see that happening. Having said that, it's not a guarantee because they also need a wide receiver. I don't think Quentin Johnston is the guy they expected he'd be. Josh Palmer isn't a number one option. They need to build around Justin Herbert. Now, they could trade back and just help their O-line out, or hope that they can at least move back up and get Rome Odunze or someone else. But I think they're probably going to stick and pick with Malik Neighbours unless they can get a lot for this pick. This is probably the best spot for the Vikings to aim for. I think it would be too difficult for a team to jump over the Vikings if they get to here. But if this pick happens, it probably won't happen until the Cardinals have definitely picked at number 4, so that the Vikings make sure they're not paying up a whole lot just to have a team jump over them. In my next mock, I might have some more trades in there, but at the moment, it's just too hard to know where they're going to trade. Now, the Chargers do have other options here. They don't have any good tight ends, and there is a very good tight end in this class in Brock Bowers. So don't be surprised if Brock Bowers is the pick here as well. The Chargers have a lot of options here. They do need to give Justin Herbert some better weapons. Which one they go with, I don't know. Now, with the 6th pick, there's a lot of people talking about the Giants taking a quarterback. In fact, even if you're betting on this market, quarterback is the second favorite pick. It's about 3-1 odds, which seems crazy to me because they've come out and said over and over again that Daniel Jones is the option. Now, that could be smoke. Maybe they want to kind of make it less appealing for teams to jump over them and just assume they're going to take a wide receiver. But for me personally, if I'm them, I'm giving Daniel Jones another year and I'm taking the wide receiver. They've got nothing at wide receiver. They've got a whole heap of small guys. They need this guy, a big wide receiver option. Now, it might be that Malik Neighbours falls here, and he probably will if a team jumps over them to take a quarterback. But if everything goes without a trade, then they still get a great wide receiver option here. So I've got 3 straight quarterbacks and then 3 straight wide receivers. Even if someone jumps up to take a quarterback, I still think it's 4 quarterbacks and a couple of wide receivers. I can't see any reason for the Giants to do anything else. They've kind of priced themselves out of taking a quarterback here because they're paying Daniel Jones so much money and they can't get out of that contract. Now, the 7th pick, this is the easiest pick in the whole mock draft. It's going to be Joe Alt. He is by far the best tackle option in this draft, and that's exactly what the Titans need. The Titans have always been a team that's built their success around a really strong O-line and a good run game. Now, they've just lost Derrick Henry, so they really need to start to rebuild that run game and also make it a little bit better for Will Levis. They need to give him every chance to succeed. They paid a reasonable amount for him last season. He's going to be the guy. I don't think he should be the guy. I don't think he's that good, but they've got to give him an opportunity. And to do that, they need to have a really strong O-line in place. I think they'll probably take multiple linemen in this draft, but Joe Alt is the easiest option here. He's a clear left tackle option. A lot of the other guys might need to start at guard and move outside. Alt is a left tackle. He is a starting left tackle. It makes perfect sense for them to draft him here. Now, we finally get a defensive player off the draft with the 8th pick, and I think this is probably the earliest we'll see a defensive player. I guess it's possible the Chargers could go that way, but if they're thinking defense, they might as well just trade down. Dallas Turner, for me, is the best edge option. There are 3 clear good edge options in this draft, and they realistically could go any time in the first round. There's a couple of reasons for that, but for me, Turner's clearly the best option. He's very athletic, excellent speed, broke out after Will Anderson graduated last year. I'm pretty confident he's going to be the top defensive pick. Whether he goes here or not, I don't know. The Falcons, I've mocked them an edge player for the last 3 years, and they keep not doing, and their edge production keeps being terrible. They need to do something. I think they finally do that now that they've got the 8th pick. Now they've brought in Kirk Cousins to get the offense and give him a whole heap of offensive weapons. Now they need to get the defense running. Dallas Turner is the clear best guy to do that. I reckon that we'll see Dallas Turner. Whether he goes here, whether they trade back with the Vikings still haven't moved up. That is also a possibility. We'll just have to wait and see what happens. But if there's no trades, I think this is probably the best way this is going to go. So the first 8 picks, if you missed it, Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, Joe Alt, Dallas Turner. Now, obviously, we could have a trade in there, but if we don't have a trade, and that's unlikely, I think this is the way it'll go. Now, let's move on to the 9th pick. And this is where things get really interesting because we've got the Bears back on the clock. Now, I've got to say, I think at this point, probably we'll have had a trade up past them. If we don't, I would imagine the Bears would happily trade back because there's no one here that really fulfills a need for them. I could see them wanting to take a wide receiver, and if one of the wide receivers falls, which could happen if there's a trade, then it would make sense to take one here. I think a Neighbors or something like that would be fantastic for them, would give them someone to work around, and that player could develop behind DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. But given they've already got those weapons, given they've got two good tight ends, now that they've brought Gerald Everett in to play with Cole Kmet, I think realistically, they're probably not looking for more pass-catching options. I think they've given Caleb Williams enough, and they've already got a running back in DeAndre Swift. I feel like it's either work on the defense or make sure that that O-line is really strong to make sure that Caleb Williams has that chance to succeed. JC Latham is, for me, probably the second offensive lineman off the board, but here it gets a little bit murky. There's a lot of good offensive linemen that you can take in this draft. I feel like Latham's probably the second best. I feel like he can play tackle, but he can definitely start inside and then shift out. Regardless, there's a lot of reports that suggest this is going to be a premium position. So if it's not an offensive tackle, I feel like they probably have to go D-line. Now, for me, a defensive tackle isn't a premium option, but it is possible that they would go with someone like a Byron Murphy and really make sure that their run stopping is improved, or they could go for an edge option. Actually, a lot of people have Jared Verse going here. I personally think it's a little bit early for Jared Verse. I don't think he's got that level of talent, but if they decide that Jared Verse is the guy, then I think it's realistic for them to take it here. I feel like this is one of the situations where you expect they're probably going to trade down. The problem with the mock draft is I have no idea who they're going to trade with. There's 5 or 6 teams that could happily trade up to here and take any number of different players, especially if there's a quarterback still available they like. So I think it would be surprising if the Bears do sit here and pick. I think they're probably going to trade down, and that makes life a little bit more difficult when trying to mock them. Now, the 10th pick, the Jets. The Jets are clearly in a win-now situation. They're trading for players left, right, and center, but they also need to pick the right player for them now. They've just brought Mike Williams in, so there's no reason for them to really reach for a wide receiver here. I think this is way too early for a Brian Thomas or any other receivers on the board. I think this is the obvious situation where we probably see Brock Bowers go. If Bowers hasn't gone by now, I think the Jets would be crazy to pass on him because they're really weak at tight end. They've got Tyler Conklin, who's meh. They're bringing in Jeremy Ruckert, who is okay, but he's more of a blocking tight end. They need someone who can be a receiver, and Brock Bowers is one of the best receiving tight ends we've seen in years. We saw what Sam Laporta could do. We've seen what Kyle Pitts can do. Brock Bowers is arguably better. He's been very good. So while the Jets do have a couple of other needs, I think Brock Bowers is the clear guy to take here. He's the guy that can push them over the top and give Aaron Rodgers that extra weapon to help them get towards that Super Bowl and that ring that they've been dreaming of for so long. Now, the 11th pick, I don't think this pick is going to happen here. I think this is going to be the team. I think this is going to be the player. But where this ends up, I have no idea. They're probably going to trade up. If they don't, though, obviously the Vikings are still going to take a quarterback. They've signaled that by trading for that 23rd pick with the Texans. They're going to use that to try to move up. But realistically, if they're not able to, or if they don't believe another team's going to jump over them, they could just sit here and pick as well. Regardless, the pick is probably JJ McCarthy. I'm not a big fan of JJ McCarthy. I know there's a lot of hype about him at the moment. He's the best remaining option, but even then, it's not by a lot. There's some teams that don't even have McCarthy in their top 4 options. There's some that like Bo Nix over him. So realistically, McCarthy is a real risk. He's strong, he's mobile, he can run, but I don't know. He's just not accurate enough. He doesn't make the right decisions a lot of the time. He was set up in a really good system, but realistically, he was a system quarterback. This feels very high to be taking a system quarterback. Now, to be clear, the Vikings do have a pretty good system. They have some good weapons in place. They've got Justin Jefferson. They've just brought in Jordan Addison, who looks really good. But if they take JJ McCarthy here, I'd be really concerned about Justin Jefferson for fantasy and Jordan Addison in particular. This is not a guy who's going to throw into tight windows. This is a guy who's going to make safer options, and you're going to have to force him to because his accuracy isn't there when compared to a lot of the other prospects in this class, and especially compared to someone like Kirk Cousins, who's willing to air it out. I don't think that's JJ McCarthy right now. I think he's going to need to develop into that. So realistically, I think McCarthy probably goes to the Vikings. I think this is the most likely home for him. But if he does go there, I don't like what this means for Justin Jefferson. I don't like what this means for Jordan Addison. This is going to be a difficult situation for the Vikings. It'll be interesting to see how they deal with it. Now, another team that needs a quarterback is the Denver Broncos. And I could see them taking Bo Nix here, but that would be a reach. Realistically, if they're going to take Bo Nix, they probably could trade down. I think outside the Raiders, there's really not anyone else in the first round that desperately needs a quarterback. So I think that probably the Broncos could afford to trade back. They don't have a second round pick. So I feel like it makes sense for them to slide back, give this pick to someone else who needs it, and then they can take Bo Nix later on. If they stick and pick, however, which is an easier thing to mock, I feel like going someone like Byron Murphy makes sense. This is kind of the area where I'd like to see Murphy go. He's the kind of player I really like, and the Broncos just have not been able to stop the run. While they might need a quarterback, and while Bo Nix fits well in the Sean Payton system, I feel like Byron Murphy has enough talent to deserve to go this high, and he really fills a need for what the Broncos actually need. He's probably going to be the first tackle off the board, but he could go anywhere from 8 or 9, all the way down to in the 20s. It's really difficult to mock Byron Murphy because it's hard to know who decides they need him and whether they decide that he's the player that will fill that need for him. It's a lot to pay for a guy that's essentially a run stopper, but he does have the ability to pressure the quarterback enough that I feel like it makes sense to take him this early. Now, with a 13 pick, tackles are going to start going off the board a lot more. We've got a lot of teams here that need tackles. We saw a big tackle run around this stage last year. I think we're going to see the same thing happen this year. It's a really good O-lineman class this year. There's probably 7 or 8 viable first-round options, and that means that a lot of teams are going to end up taking them. The problem is that there's not much depth underneath those top options, and that means teams with their first pick are going to want to take an O-lineman if that's a need for them. For me, Fashanu is the next best option. I think he's actually pretty close to JC Latham, and I could see him going off the board second. Now, the Raiders have a lot of needs, but realistically, fixing up the O-line probably needs to be a good starting point. It's a good, safe option, and that's exactly what the Raiders haven't been doing for years. They have busted over and over and over again in the first round. Now, they get it right occasionally. They got someone like Josh Jacobs, who was a good pick, but realistically probably only worth an end of first round value. I think they need to start taking more sensible options and not reaching for guys like the sorts of Cleveland Farrell and Henry Ruggs, etc., that they've often taken in the first round. Alex Leatherwood was another one who was a terrible pick, even though we all saw it coming. So I think Olu Fashanu is the kind of guy who can be really safe. He can play at tackle. He can play at guard. He fills a need for them. They could go for a quarterback. They could even go for a cornerback. This is where the cornerback could start going on. I've got one going in a couple of picks. They could take a totally different O-lineman. They could even take Byron Murphy if he's here. But with the Raiders, you just have no idea what they're going to do. I could see them doing any number of different things. Now, pick 14, another tackle. This is tackle central in this area here. And I'd say I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of teams trying to jump over each other. That's why that Broncos spot is so valuable. If you like a specific tackle, that's where you need to go to make sure that you can get that tackle before a whole heap of other teams are going to be picking O-linemen. Now, Troy Fautanu was good for Washington. Is he good enough for the NFL to be taken this early? I don't know. But the Saints really need a tackle. Their left tackle has been really weak. Trevor Penning has been a bust. They don't really have any other options. They really need to shore up those trenches and make life a little bit easier for Derek Carr. Now, they do have a heap of other options. They could decide that they go for another O-lineman, someone who can play a little bit outside a little bit better, they could go a defensive tackle. This could be a Byron Murphy spot. I could even see them going wide receiver. It wouldn't be crazy for them to move up to get a wide receiver, to give them someone to mix with Chris Olave, or we could see the first cornerback off the board. And it wouldn't be totally insane to see them go quarterback here if someone that they like happens to fall. I think tackle makes the most sense here, and I think Fatanu's probably going to be the fourth guy off the board. But again, with these tackles and O-linemen, it could go in any order. It's really difficult to pick. Now, at 15, we've got a team that's totally different to all the others. This is the first team that has a real clear defensive need. They got their quarterback last year in Anthony Richardson. Now they need to get other players around him. Now, realistically, they've got quite a few weapons. They could use a wide receiver or a tight end. They've got a million tight ends. They can't seem to decide who's good. So realistically, a Brock Bowers is someone they could take. I wouldn't mind seeing them move up to get him. They could take a wide receiver if they feel like the value's there. But I don't think this is the right space to be taking Brian Thomas. I don't think he's that good, and I can't see any of the others falling. So that means realistically, cornerback is by far the best option for the Colts. Now, Quinion Mitchell is the guy that I've got as my top cornerback at the moment. It's really interesting. There are three clear top cornerbacks in this class. Mitchell's kind of risen to the guy that's the top option, and I feel like he's the guy that makes most sense for them. But they could easily take Terrion Arnold or Nate Wiggins. Nate Wiggins is the most athletic, although Mitchell is very athletic as well. But he makes some weird decisions, whereas Terrion Arnold's a very safe corner option. Not as athletic, but very safe. I feel like the Colts probably need to go for a guy with a little bit more upside, and I feel like that's Mitchell. But if it was Arnold here, I wouldn't be surprised at all. Either of those guys would be a valid option. Now, with the 16th pick, the Seahawks are another team that does weird stuff in the draft. And a lot of people are talking about them maybe trading down or trading up. There's a whole heap of different options here. But I think they're going to go O-lineman. It's really O-lineman or D-lineman. They're going to work on the trenches. It makes no sense for them to pick another position. They have most of the other positions sorted. They've managed to get a couple of good tackles in recently, and Charles Cross is going to be the guy there at left tackle, but they need a right tackle who can also play guard, someone they can shift around and move around a little bit. I realize that says edge here. That's wrong. This guy's not an edge. I just forgot to change the graphic. This guy is a guard or right tackle, and I feel like he is a good option for the Seahawks. He fills what they need. He was really good for OSU during the season. So I think Fuaga makes sense here. But if one of the other guys falls to this spot or they decide they like someone else and they want to move up, I think that's entirely possible as well. But I think it would be crazy to see the Seahawks take someone that wasn't an O-lineman or a defensive tackle or edge. So if you missed the earlier picks, we have had Williams, May, Daniels, Harrison, Neighbors, Odunze, Alt, and Turner as the top 8 picks. But as we said, probably going to see a trade down at some point in time by a team to let that number 11 pick of the Vikings up. 11's McCarthy. Before that, we have Latham and Bowers. Then McCarthy, Murphy, Fashanu, Fatanu, Mitchell, and then this guy, Teolisi Fuaga. Now, this is where things get very interesting. And after the first dozen or so picks, it starts to get a little bit tougher because you don't know what players are going to end up there. And you also don't know what teams are going to move around. We generally see a lot more trades in that area. So that will make this pick very interesting because I don't think the Jaguars are going to stay here. I could see them moving very easily. But if they do stick and pick, they are one of the few teams that really needs a cornerback. I could see them going for Terrion Arnold here. He's a very safe pick. He's not the athlete of the other guys, but I feel like he's a sensible option. I like the fact that he can ease in as a nickelback initially because they signed Ronald Darby to go opposite Tyson Campbell. That means you can stick Arnold mostly in the slot, have him in occasionally, and then ease him into that spot and get him to take over for Darby eventually. I feel like he's got the talent to make things work. He just doesn't have the upside of the other guys. And we do know that the Jaguars will occasionally really go for upside, so it wouldn't surprise me if they go for a Wiggins here or if they try to reach past the Colts and go for Mitchell. But I think it makes more sense here for them to take Terrion Arnold, the safe option. They could also go O-lineman or D-lineman, but with so many other teams fighting for those O-linemen, it wouldn't surprise me if there's just not the best option there for them. And it makes sense to take an elite tackle rather than to take the next best offensive lineman. And Arnold is a very good tackle. Now, with the 18th pick, We have Amarius Mims. Now, Mims could go anywhere. There's a whole heap of different areas he could be drafted. It really depends on how much risk a team is willing to take. Now, Mims has been injured. He's older than a lot of the other prospects, but he's also a real talent. He's massive. He's very athletic. He's a real boom-bust option. And it's the kind of thing I could see the Bengals doing is to take him here. They need to improve their O-line. Mims is someone who can play out at tackle, which helps them. But I could also see them taking a Fatanu or a Fawaga here if one of them falls as well. It really depends on who's willing to take that risk. Mims could go realistically as high as the top 10 if a team just falls in love with him and is willing to take that risk. Or it could fall out of the first round entirely if a lot of teams decide that he's just too injury prone and they're not willing to take that risk with their first pick. So a real boom bust option, but I like Amarius Mims a lot. I feel like he could turn a franchise around with his ability to really protect that quarterback, and that's exactly what Joe Burrow needs at the moment. Now, if they don't go that way, I could see them going a defensive tackle. There are a few good defensive tackles in this class, but I think most of them are going to fall because not many teams need them. That means we could see some value here for the Bengals if they do decide to take a tackle to replace DJ Reader, who's left. It also wouldn't be crazy to get a wide receiver or to get a cornerback as well. They have lost Boyd, and Higgins is a big question mark for this season. So a wide receiver wouldn't be crazy. And I think this is the kind of area where we could see Brian Thomas start to come off the board potentially. Now, 19th pick, I think this is about as low as you're going to get for Jared Verse. Jared Verse is a very safe option. I don't think he has the upside of a lot of the other edge rushers around, but he's someone that should go at least in the top 20. I've seen a lot of people mocking him to the Bears with the 9th pick. I think that's fine. I think if the Bears take him, they probably realize they can move down a couple of picks and get him there as well. But regardless, someone's going to take him, and I feel like it makes sense for the Rams to do that. Their D-line was surprisingly good last year. They were really impressive given their lack of talent. But they've lost Aaron Donald, and he was taking double teams every single time. His double team success rate was higher than the success rate of the majority of other players against single teams. That's going to make a big difference. So the Rams need to improve their D-line somewhere. Now, I think it makes sense to improve them more on the edge and give someone opposite Byron Young, because realistically, Michael Hoke sucked last season. I'm shocked he was starting. It didn't make any sense to start him. I was surprised Byron Young broke out as well as he did. I liked him going into the draft, but I didn't think he was going to be the guy with so little support. It's going to be a whole lot harder for Byron Young next year without them bringing in someone else who can also provide a threat and mean that they can't just focus on Young. I feel like that means they have to take someone. Jared versus the safe option, but I also like Laiatu Latu. The problem is that he's got a lot of injury question marks. He's extremely talented. Most teams think he's a better player than Verse, but there's so many injury concerns that I can imagine a lot of teams will just wipe him off their board. And I can imagine the Rams would do that. That's the kind of thing they do when they're making decisions. So realistically, Latu's medical issues are the reason that I don't have him going over Verse. But if we get some good news on his medical issues, he's someone I'll push up. And if a team just decides that they believe in what he can do despite the medical issues, I could see him going in the first round as well. In fact, I've mocked him later on. Now, if the Rams don't go D-line, I think it would make sense for them to go for a real stud cornerback because they lack that at the moment. And this is a situation we could see Nate Wiggins go, or they could go for a safety like Cooper DeJean. Brock Bowers wouldn't be crazy, but they'd have to move up to get him. 20th pick is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, they have brought in some quarterbacks, finally, but they're still going to want to run the ball a whole lot. And to do that, they need to have a strong O-line. So it makes sense for them to shore up their O-line. Now, there is one clear good center in this class, and it's Jackson Powers Johnson. And Pittsburgh need a center. So realistically, I think this makes the most sense, but they're not the only team that could go for him. So if he's either not available or they decide to go in an opposite direction, I think an offensive lineman makes most sense here as well. They're one of the many teams that desperately needs to improve their O-line. We've seen how important that is. I think that Powers Johnson makes the most sense. He's just such a talented player, so consistent on the interior, and I feel like the interior is where Pittsburgh need to improve. Now, having said that, they could also go for a wide receiver. We know they've got George Pickens and nothing else. So they're going to need to get an upgrade there as well. But I think that can probably happen in the second round. There's pretty good wide receiver depth in this class. I feel like if you're going to go one way, you probably want to go O-lineman in the first round and wide receiver in the second round if you've got the choice, which is why in this mock, I've got a lot of O-linemen going in the first round and a whole lot less receivers. Regardless of the pick here, unless it's a wide receiver, I think it's fantastic news for George Pickens, who becomes the clear number one and finally gets an actual quarterback throwing to him, not a backup dressed as a starter. Now, with the 21st pick, we have the Miami Dolphins, who have a number of options here. If there's a player they love that's a very, very high-quality speed player, I can imagine them going there. And there are a lot of speed receivers in this class. They could use a wide receiver 3, but I feel like that's a second or third round pick for me. I think they have to go with the O-line. They have to do a better job of keeping Tua healthy if they're going to use Tua. So there's really only two options. There's get an O-lineman, and there's plenty available here, or there's get a defensive tackle because they just lost Christian Wilkins, and that's going to make them really, really weak in their defensive trenches. I think lineman makes the most sense. Jordan Morgan's a bit of a reach here, but I feel like teams are going to need to reach for O-linemen if they start to fly off the board. If someone like a Fitano or Fuaga falls here, they'll be absolutely thrilled. But I think realistically, they're probably going to have to go for that next tier of O-linemen. I feel like Morgan is one of those. Morgan's the kind of guy who's got excellent athleticism, but he's not a finished product. And so it's a real question mark as to whether he goes here or even a little bit earlier, like a Mims, if a team falls in love with him, or he could fall entirely out of the first round. I could see it going either way, but I feel like the Dolphins are going to love the option here of going an O-lineman. It just makes most sense for them. Now, with the 22nd pick, we have Nate Wiggins. Now, Nate Wiggins is the kind of upside option that the Eagles love going for. They need another cornerback badly. They get an elite athlete here. He's someone that is going to do what Kelly Ringo should have done when he came in. I thought Ringo was a possible first-round prospect who really fell, and he totally busted. Wiggins is the guy that they probably need here. They've needed a cornerback for a while. They get thrown on a whole lot. They've got an excellent defensive line, and that's because they always go D-line or O-line in the first round. They need to start mixing it up because they're really weak in other areas. So I think cornerback makes the most sense, but only if one of the top three falls to them. So if they can get a Mitchell or an Arnold or a Wiggins, I think they have to take them here. If none of those three are available, I feel like they probably have to go elsewhere. I think a Jason Kelce replacement in Powers Johnson, assuming he doesn't go to Pittsburgh, would be a good option here. I could also see them going Cooper DeJean. He's more of a safety than a cornerback, but I feel like he could still fill that spot, do a lot of work in the slot, and mean that it makes life a whole lot easier for their other cornerbacks. We'll have to see what happens with that pick there. That's going to be an interesting one. They're another team that I could also see trading in either direction as well. I think it makes sense for them to trade back, but I could also see them trading up if they fall in love with someone there. Also, don't be surprised if they take someone like a Brian Thomas if he falls, which he has in this mock. They could use a better wide receiver 3, and that means when eventually Devonta Smith moves on or AJ Brown moves on, that means they've got that second option already there. 23rd pick. Now, I don't think the Vikings will end up having this pick. I don't think it makes any sense for them to end up having this pick. I feel like they're probably going to trade this away to get a quarterback. But if they happen to hold on to this pick for some reason, like they believe they can get a quarterback another way, or alternatively, they just feel like they don't need to chase a quarterback and they can just stick and pick, then defensive tackle is something they desperately need. There's a couple of good defensive tackles in this class. Chris Jenkins is probably the second best for me. Don't be surprised if Brian Murphy somehow falls to here. That wouldn't be absolutely crazy. He could go anywhere in the first round. I could also see them going a Michael Hall or a Johnny Newton as well. But I think Chris Jenkins for me is the second best option. He's just a really good polished player. Kind of what you would expect out of a national champion. I expect him to be very good in the NFL as established. Now, 24th pick, O-lineman again. Shocking. It's very strong O-lineman class. I expect that we see another O-lineman picked here. Tyler Guyton's another guy that's really on the borderline for the first round. But I feel like because so many teams need O-linemen, especially in the back end of the first round, it makes sense that a few of these guys will rise up. Guyton is one of those guys. Now, he's more of an exterior player. Sorry, my phone alarm is going on. He's more of an interior O-lineman, and I feel like that's probably what the Cowboys need. I feel like they can probably just replace Smith with Smith at tackle, and they're going to be okay. But the interior of their line needs to be better. They've kind of based their identity on having a really good O-line, and that started to fade the last few seasons. So I feel like bringing in a Guyton or someone like that kind of takes them back to what they're trying to do and make it easier for them to run the ball, and also gives time to Dak Prescott to use his weapons like CeeDee Lamb. Now, they could also go for a D lineman. I just talked about the D lineman options. I think it would be reasonable to select one here, but I think O-lineman is probably the number one option for them. Now, if you just tuned in, here's who we've had so far. We had Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, Marvin Harrison Jr. If I ever had Malik Neighbors, because I don't have that trade up yet, but we might see JJ McCarthy there. Then we had Roma Dunze, Joe Alt, Dallas Turner, JC Latham, though I think that the Bears probably trade down, as I said. Brock Bowers, JJ McCarthy, currently in his 11. I just think he's going to go to the Vikings somewhere. Byron Murphy, you could go anywhere in the first round. Then a whole heap of tackles for Shanu, Fatanu. Also got Fuaga in there. A couple of cornerbacks in Mitchell and Arnold. Mims with the Bengals reaching a little bit there. First falling. Powers Johnson, the center, with the 20th pick. I love that pick. A couple more O-linemen in Morgan and Guyton. And we also have Wiggins and Jenkins. Now, this is where things get very tricky. It's very hard to mock the last 8 or so picks. Most years, most people get the last 8 or so picks wrong just because there's always so much movement. You don't know who's going to fall. You don't know who's going to rise. It's really hard to work out exactly what's going to happen. But this is a guy I think is going to end up in the first round. I'm very confident. He's a very talented player. He offers so many possibilities. Cooper DeJean. I just love this guy. He's a safety. He's a cornerback. He can play in the slot. He can do a little bit of everything. And I feel like that's exactly what the Packers need. They need someone who can play across from Jair Alexander, but they also need a second safety. They brought in Xavier McKinney. Their safeties were awful last year. They brought in McKinney. They need a second guy. And I feel like Cooper's the guy that can do that. I could also see a situation where they go O-line, but so many of them are going off the board that one of the teams that needs an O-lineman is going to not take an O-lineman. It's hard to know which one, but I feel like we could get to the situation where the Packers just don't have a viable O-lineman available to them, and therefore they have to take another position. Could also see them taking a run stuffer at defensive tackle, someone like a Hall. Or I could see them trading down and grabbing a safety. There's not really any clear-cut safeties that belong in the first round. DeJean's really the only option. He's more of a versatility option. But I could see them taking some sort of defensive back later on in the draft as well. Pick number 26. This is an interesting one. The Bucs somehow made the playoffs last year with Baker Mayfield, which is a little bit crazy, and I feel like they're going to try to run it back and do the same thing. I don't know that it's going to work the second time around, but regardless, with Shaq Barrett pretty much done, they need to upgrade at edge. I feel like they can use Latu here. Now, Latu's a real risky pick. There are a whole lot of injury concerns around him, but if a team thinks they can draft him, he could go as high as the top 10. He's got that much talent. He's probably the second most talented edge option behind just Dallas Turner, but Verse is so much safer. We know what Verse is going to be able to do. That's Jared Verse. Latu is a real question mark. He realistically shouldn't have even really been playing. There are a lot of thoughts that he wouldn't even get to this point in his career. But now he's kind of gotten through those, and he's given a little bit more confidence to teams that maybe he is someone that they're going to be able to rely on long term. So I can see a situation where Latu goes here. I can see a situation where he drops out of the first round entirely. He could fall a long way, or he could get picked in the top 10. He's probably got the most variability in his picks of all the options in the first round here. But I love this spot for the Bucs if he makes it there. And it wouldn't surprise me if they move up to grab somebody. They could also get a cornerback. They could really use an upgrade there. They need some O-lineman help as well, but I think those are all going to be off the board. And it also wouldn't surprise me if they take Brian Thomas here. He's still on the board for me. And there's a whole heap of wide receivers that belong at the back end of the first round, early second round. And I think it would make sense for them to take one of those as well. Expect something to happen here, be it a trade up or down or a bit of a surprise pick. But the Bucs are a really interesting one this year. I'm really looking forward to seeing what they do. Pick number 27. I don't know that we'll get a fourth true corner off the board. I'm not counting DeJean as a true corner. I'm not sure that we'll get one here. Kool-Aid McKinstry is the guy that I think is really interesting. He could sneak into the first round. he's got a broken foot, which makes life a little bit difficult. Without that, I think he's a pretty clear-cut first rounder. But with the broken foot, it makes it a little bit harder for him to trust. Having said that, the Cardinals aren't challenging right now. The Cardinals aren't winning anytime soon. They're rebuilding. I think realistically, it makes sense for them to take someone who within the next year or two is going to be that option for them. That's Kool-Aid McKinstry. I think he's a good, reliable option once he's healthy, but he needs to get healthy first. I think there's plenty of upside there as well. They're just going to need to take the risk on his foot. Foot's healed most of the time. It's not the kind of injury that's going to be a major issue that's going to keep recurring. It just means they don't know exactly what he can do because he's not healthy after that combine issue. Could also see them taking another cornerback. There's not really anyone that jumps out to me here. There are a couple of options. Could also see them go on defensive tackle. This is a Michael Hall spot, for example, Chris Jenkins or something like that. They could take an edge rusher, though I think anyone would be a bit of a reach here. And I could see them taking a guard or even another receiver. 2 receivers in the first round would be a pretty funky move, and I'd love to see it. I don't think it'll happen, but that would be very fun. I think they're probably more likely to go that way, second or early third round. Now, this is where we finally get a receiver again. And I'd be shocked if Michael Thomas gets down this low. I don't think there's any clear spot for where he goes, but there's going to become a point where a team goes, well, this guy's the best option available. This is probably the next spot where we see a team that definitely should go wide receiver. I think the bookmakers have the Bills as being favorites to take a wide receiver. It's the most likely option for them. And they're one of the few teams that's in that situation, especially in the second half of the draft. That's realistically because to get into the playoffs, you have to have good wide receivers. And most of the teams that made the playoffs do have good wide receivers. The Bills don't. They get a little bit lucky. They've got Josh Allen, which kind of makes up for a whole heap of stuff. Khalil Shakir's okay. Gabe Davis is very, very hot cold, and he's gone now. Which is great because they need someone who's going to be a little bit more consistent and can start to take over from Stephon Diggs, who realistically can't have that much left in him. I felt like he was starting to fade towards the end of last season anyway. It wouldn't surprise me if within half a season, Brian Thomas is the number one guy in Buffalo. He's a big receiver. He's very talented, very athletic. I think he's a real weapon, and he's the guy that the Bills can use. Now, there are problems here. He's pretty lazy with his routes. He has a tendency just to kind of move around and try to use his size. And he gets a lot of drops. And when you've got someone firing the ball hard at you like Josh Allen, that's not ideal. Whether they can coach those things out of him, I don't know. There is serious bust potential here because of that. We've seen some big guys struggle for that reason. Think Quentin Johnston, for example. But I do think he's probably got the most upside of the other receivers around as well. He is that big guy that the Bills clearly need because they are lacking a little bit of size there. He's also someone that can kind of work in conjunction with Dalton Kincaid and mean that they can start using a lot more 11 personnel rather than relying on getting Dawson Knox involved all the time. Pick 29. This gets very interesting here because the Lions don't tend to take the best player available. They tend to take the best personality available. And it clearly works for them. Realistically, it's hard to know exactly who's going to fit with their system, but I think Kamari Lassiter is the kind of guy they might surprise us and pick. They clearly need a cornerback. That's where teams have attacked them previously. The question is who they take, though. I think Lassiter has the right personality to make that work, and that's strange to say for a Georgia player. That's not really what you expect out of Georgia players. Often they're talented but flawed players, whereas I think Lassiter is the kind of hardworking guy I could imagine them using. He doesn't have the upside of some guys, but I can imagine him coming in and just being the sort of consistent option that they desperately need at cornerback there. Also, wouldn't surprise me if he falls out of the first round entirely. He could fall quite low in the second round as well. He is a little bit of that boom-bust option, but I think he's probably the fourth or fifth cornerback off the board if I had to guess. And I don't even want to try to guess exactly who the Lions are going to take. I think cornerback makes sense. They could go edge as well, but I don't think Latu really fits for them. They'd love to get Verse, but there's no way they're going to get to him. They could also use an upgrade at wide receiver too. I'm not convinced that Jamison Williams is the guy and Josh Reynolds is out of town. Or they could just help the trenches and get a defensive tackle. There's options there, but it's all going to be about the personality type when you're talking about Dan Campbell. Pick 30. Another team that just seems to find value in every draft, and it makes them very hard to mock because the Raiders are going to find a good player in the first round. The question is always which good player is going to fall. Someone will fall to the Ravens here and they're going to take them. I just don't know who it's going to be. Graham Barton is a guy that I think probably doesn't deserve to be in the first round, but because so many teams are reaching for O-linemen and because there's not really much depth after that, I can imagine teams reaching for Barton a little bit. A lot of people have Barton a whole lot higher than this. But for me, he just really fills the need for the Ravens. They need to work on their interior. They need guards. They need to improve in the trenches because their game is built around Lamar Jackson staying healthy and being able to get their run game going. That can only happen if their O-line is very strong, and they need to keep improving their O-line constantly, and that can only happen if you draft them. I think Graham Barton makes sense here, but I'd be very surprised if he goes there because the Ravens just always seem to find a player who's dropped in the draft and seem to get that value. I could also see a situation where they go for a little bit of size in wide receiver. Brian Thomas would make sense, but he's a bit boom-busty for the Ravens, I think. I think Xavier Legette would be a great option here, but I don't think that's where the Ravens are going to go. I think they're probably going to go for the trenches here, or potentially for another premium position like an edge or a cornerback. They're good in all positions. They just don't have the high-quality options that a lot of the other teams around them have. They're just consistent across the board, so they can use an upgrade in a few different places. Now, the Super Bowl contenders. 49ers could go any number of directions here. They don't have any desperate needs, but they do have some areas where they could definitely upgrade. I think edge rusher is probably the place I'd like to see them upgrade. We saw them trying to use Chase Young here. He's gone now. They don't really have a lot of quality there. They brought in Leonard Floyd, and they brought in Yetur Gross-Matos. There's no way I've said that correctly. I don't think those guys are starters. I think those guys are rotational options. The 49ers like to rotate a lot of guys opposite Nick Bosa to try to keep them fresh and also to get Bosa out occasionally as well. There's a whole lot of good options they could take here. I think Chop Robinson's one of them. I could see him going in the first round. I could see him falling to the third round. It really depends on how teams feel about him. He was fantastic at the combine, which is why I think he might end up in the first round, but he isn't the biggest player, and I feel like that might be a bit of an issue. If they want to go bigger, they could go Darius Robinson, no relation. I don't think that really makes sense for what they're trying to do. He probably is more of a tackle to me. They could go Braswell or Isaac. There's a whole heap of edge rushers that don't belong in the first round, but we see guys right into the first round that don't belong there all the time, especially around these picks where the guys who are teams that are very good are just basically drafting for a specific need that they have for a rotational guy that's going to do a specific thing for them. I feel like Robinson's the kind of guy that can do that as a speed rusher for them, but there's a whole heap of other things they could do. They could go for a guard if one of them falls, though in my mock, obviously they didn't. They could go for a cornerback if they feel like the value's right. A wide receiver 3 would be a great pick here because a lot of them have fallen, but I just don't think they're going to go in that direction. I feel like they probably go for the D-line. Finally, pick number 32. It's very hard with the Chiefs because they keep doing weird stuff. And then they keep winning. I mean, I'm a Chiefs fan. I love the Chiefs. I've loved the Chiefs from way back when we were rubbish. I fell in love with the Chiefs because I just seemed to keep drafting Travis Kelce, and I decided that I love Travis Kelce. Maybe I'm secretly Taylor Swift in disguise, but basically, I've loved the Chiefs for a long time. And that means that every year when I come into the draft and they draft some rando, I leave very disappointed. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, disappointed. Last year's Felix, disappointed. Not getting a wide receiver in the first round when there were some good options, disappointed. I know Rashee Rice turned out to be good, but I mean, realistically, whether he gets a suspension or not is a real question mark and may push the Chiefs even more towards a wide receiver. You'd think the Chiefs have to go wide receiver here, and they are the bookies' favorite to do that. The bookies have them as over a 50% chance of that occurring. There's a real question mark on which wide receiver they go. They've got a lot of different options here. I love Xavier Legette. I had him in college fantasy last year. College fantasy is very fun, by the way. I've had him in college fantasy for a couple of years because it's a dynasty league, and I'll have him in my NFL team because that's how our league works. Man, he was good last year. He's big, he's fast, he's good in the contested catch. He's a pretty good runner with the ball. He does a lot of things. I don't personally understand why a lot of people have him below a lot of the Texas guys and people like that. I love Legette. He should be in the first round for me. Does he go to the Chiefs? I think it makes sense. They've got some smaller speed guys, but they do need some size. Travis Kelce's not going to be around for much longer, sadly, and that means they need someone that they can look to in the red zone. I just don't think that's Rashee Rice. I think they need someone like Leggett. Now, you could see them taking Adonai Mitchell or someone like that, or one of the really quick options. A whole heap of small, quick runners and quick receivers in this year's class. I could see them potentially going Xavier Worthy. There's a heap of options here. I could also see them wait until the second or third round because that seems to be what they do. If they do that, they might upgrade a tackle. They might get a defensive tackle. That would make sense. They do struggle to stop the run. What I'd love to see them do is get Brock Bowers, but they need to pay a king's ransom to make that happen. I don't see that occurring. I think with receivers makes the most sense. Leggett is my favorite. I love Xavier Leggett. Please do it, Andy Reid. Please do it. Cool. Thanks for joining me today for my NFL mock draft. It's been really fun. If you've got any questions or thoughts, always feel free to hit me up. You can find me on Instagram at the Fantasy First Down. You can find me on Twitter at Fantasy First Down with no O. Or you can check out the Rasball website where I write articles every week or two. We've got a whole heap of tight end articles there. In fact, there's every position. I just happen to write the tight end ones. So make sure you check out the Rasball website for a whole heap of content there. And go to my website, which is ffdfantasyfootball.com. I'll be back next week for another NFL mock draft. I'm planning on including trades in the next one. I didn't not include trades this time. It's just so hard to know exactly where the trades are going to go, but I think it makes it more interesting if next time I have something where I do have a lot of trades and we can see what the different options are and talk through a lot of those options. Regardless, this is going to be a really interesting NFL draft. I'm really excited for it. It's my favorite time of year. Super excited. My birthday's before the NFL draft. Not looking forward to that at all. Just looking forward to the NFL draft. I hope you're feeling the same way. If you've got any questions, as always, hit me up on Instagram or Twitter. I answer all your questions. I'm always happy to help out. Thanks again for joining me. I will catch you guys next week.